I'm the moderator tonight for the last session before our break, and it's going to be a stupendous one. I want to call out the last round for everything they've done for us. They have let us use the space, and the staff is incredibly helpful and enthusiastic, and I think we should give them a round of applause. Eat and drink to your heart's content, and there is something special on the menu, so get that too if you can. Our guest is Leslie Kean, who has been reporting for more than 20 years on UFOs, now renamed by NASA as unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP. Her topic will be UFOs and Government Acknowledgement. The phenomenon is real. She wrote a 2010 bestseller on UFOs and co-authored a series of articles for the New York Times, beginning with a groundbreaking 2017 front page story. She's going to talk about the long-ranging consequences of those stories. She's recently reported, last week actually, on U.S. intelligence whistleblower who says that U.S. intelligence officials have possession of an intact or partially intact non-human aircraft, which is really very interesting, if true. So, let me turn this over to Leslie now.
Thank you so much. Okay, I have to make sure that I'm doing the right thing with this microphone. Okay, good. So I'm just going to kind of do a stream of consciousness, kind of 20-minute overview of like my work and what's going on with UFOs. And then the most important thing is to have the questions and discussion. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I started off reporting, as was said, I started off reporting in the year 2000. I did my first story in the Boston Globe. And you might wonder, I was just a reporter working at a public radio station in California, just doing normal kinds of shows every day, news shows. And then this colleague from France sent me this report that French officials had done studying UFOs, and very high-level people like admirals and generals and police chief and scientists. And it was an incredible study, and it drew the conclusion after laying out a bunch of official cases that the best explanation we had for what they studied was the extraterrestrial hypothesis. I mean, they were literally saying in black and white, the most likely explanation for these is that we're being visited from somewhere else. And I, as a reporter, thought, what? That seems like a big story to me. So that's what kind of got me into this. And then after I published the story based on that report in the Boston Globe, I was just completely hooked on this. I didn't want to study anything else or report on anything else. Because of just the mystery of it was so compelling to me, and I was able to recognize pretty early on that there was enough evidence for this, that it was real. It was something real going on here. And I couldn't understand why there was so much ridicule and dismissal of it in our culture and in our government. So that was a challenge I wanted to take on. And so I eventually left the radio station and just started doing this full time, and I wrote a series of articles and learned more and more as I went along. And they were all very credible articles with very credible sources that they could not be ridiculed. And it was kind of a novelty in those days because the taboo was so intense. And it was a novelty to have a reporter doing the kind of stories I was doing. And I was using various outlets. It was easier to publish as a freelancer then than it is now. So, and then all of that led to a press conference at the National Press Club that I helped organize in 2007. And then eventually my book came out in 2010 called UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. And that was a big turning point because no book like that had ever come out before either. And again, we can just have questions about any of this stuff. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the book included chapters written by very high-level people. I think there were 5 generals that were part of the book, and a former governor of Arizona, and very respectable people. So it was contributed to by a lot of people from around the world too. So that book got attention, and then the big change came in 2017, which many of you people may be aware of the story that came out in the New York Times in December of 2017. And just to give you a little backstory on how that happened, because it was such a major turning point, was that I was contacted. So during the years when I was working on UFOs, I got to know a number of what we call kind of insiders, people with security clearances who know a lot about this topic and are willing to talk to people they trust. Of course, they don't reveal anything classified, but you know, I learn a lot from people like that. And I've gotten to know some of them over the years. And some of those people, and one of them was Chris Mellon, who many people might be familiar with, and a few others, invited me to Washington in October of 2017 to meet with a man named Luis Elizondo, who had headed up a Pentagon program, a secret Pentagon program investigating UFOs. And I was out in the world there. I'd been out for many years advocating for a government program investigating UFOs, and I didn't know that one existed already. So it was really an incredible revelation for me to be exposed to this. And you know, I just want to say that I'm going to tell you 4 things that these are the points I made in my book, and these were the points I'd really been working towards getting established in all the years I was reporting prior to 2017. And they were just these simple facts. The first one, that UFOs are real, that there's a real phenomenon there, they're not just fantasy. Number 2, that we don't know what they are. We cannot assume that a UFO is some visitor from another planet, which in those days, most people defined the term as to mean that. If you said, do you believe in UFOs? That really meant, do you believe that aliens are visiting us? But it really didn't mean that, but that's how people related to it. So I was trying to change the perception of what UFO actually means, and to make the point that we do not know what they are yet. They're just something unexplained. So that was really important. And the third point was to make the point that these objects are an aviation safety hazard and potentially a national security hazard for all kinds of reasons. They impact aircraft. And I did a whole story about that, and it was my second story that I did after the Boston Globe, was about aviation safety. They've impacted nuclear bases and things like that. And fourth, the point is that they need to be investigated. They need to be investigated by the government and by the scientific community. We need to get to the bottom of it. So I had been out there for 17 years making these points, and they seemed radical at the time. And what's incredible now, after 2017, all of these things are in play. All of these things have been stated or accomplished by the relevant authorities. They're all in play and underway. So it's been extremely gratifying for me to see these things be realized, and more, really. So just to explain to you, there's like this line in 2017, the before and the after. We're in a different world now with respect to UFOs. And so back to that meeting that I was called to, into this meeting with a few other people and with Luis Elizondo. I'm just curious, how many people in this room have heard of Lou Elizondo? Okay. Well, he headed up as I said, secret program at the Pentagon, which had been investigating UFOs for some years, and it was focused on Navy cases, a lot of Navy cases, intelligence cases, no commercial pilots or anything like that, but they were all military cases, and they were trying to collect data and figure out what these objects were, because they were interested in the technology, basically, in understanding the technology. And so Luis Elizondo, who headed up the program, became really frustrated with the fact that there were no resources being allocated to it. He knew enough to know the importance of this and to know that it was real and that it needed to be investigated and that it was a national security problem. But yet nobody was treating it that way in the Pentagon. He would try to get meetings with James Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, and he could never even get in the door. So he decided to resign because he thought he could do more on the outside than he was able to do on the inside. And so I was invited to meet with him like the day after he resigned, basically. And I sat across the table from him for 3 hours with these other amazing people there and just got to talk to him all about this program that no one knew about. I was shown all kinds of documents. I was shown performance reviews about him. I was shown that I learned that Senator Harry Reid was the person who who got the funding for the program. I was shown letters that Harry Reid had written. And even more mind-blowing were those 3 videos that have since become really famous. I'm sure that a lot of you have seen these Navy videos, and we released 2 of them in 2017, and another one came out later. And so these were the first official UFO videos that I had ever seen. I mean, and I think that the world has ever seen. I mean, there were certainly since the 60s, when there were some videos that were taken by military people, but it was an absolute revelation to see these and to hear from Lou about this program. And so then I was able to take it to the New York Times because I had a colleague and friend who was associated with the Times and was a freelancer. And we got the story on the front page in December of 2017. So that kind of, it was such a huge deal because it finally gave permission to the official world to take this seriously, because they learned that the Pentagon had been studying it. And so therefore there's got to be something to it. And the members of Congress started to get briefed on this. We also reported on the Nimitz case in our story in 2017, which was a case that's become very well known, involving some sightings that occurred in 2004 off the west coast of the United States, and I don't have time to go into all that, but we can talk about that if you want later. So some of those pilots were brought in to brief members of Congress, and Elizondo helped organize these briefings, as did a number of other people. And eventually, things just it was like a snowball effect. We did another story that brought more pilots out into the open in 2019 in the New York Times. And Congress learned more and more, and eventually it led to a task force being set up. It was called initially the UAP task force. They were instructed by Congress to get to the bottom of what this is about and to do the proper investigation, to collect data from all the agencies that have been collecting it but not sharing it. And then in June 2021, they put out a report where they acknowledged, this was the Office of the Director of Naval Intelligence, basically representing the intelligence community, basically acknowledged officially that UFOs are real and that there's no evidence that they're Chinese or Russian. And there's no evidence that they're American technology either. I mean, they said all these things in that report. So that leaves you with a question of, well, then what are they? And so we've had, since then, in the last couple of years, we've had historic events occur. We've had 2 open public hearings on UFOs. The first one was in May of 2021, which none of them were terribly exciting in terms of what we would have liked to have seen, but they did exist. And I was present for the first one in 2021. We've had legislation passed by Congress, which basically requires reporting be given to them from the task force, which has now been renamed ARROW. It stands for the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. This is the Pentagon office that's supposed to be taking depositions from witnesses and studying the topic, collecting data, and trying to figure out what's going on, trying to explain as many cases as they can. So that there's a requirement. Congress is really the one taking in charge here. Congress is making demands on the intelligence community and the Defense Department to deliver on this topic. And so we have since, in the last couple of years, we've had legislation passed by Congress which has demanded these reports, which has required this office to be set up and to do its work, and has also offered, more recently, protection for whistleblowers. So the people that really know what's going on with UFOs are people that have security clearances, and they're not allowed to talk about what they know because of their security clearances, because they've signed an oath to protect this information. And there's good reason for that. But a lot of them would like the world to know that this is real, even if they can't disclose the specific information that would be a national security issue. So it's fair enough to protect with security oaths the details about how the technology works, for instance, because we don't want Russia and China to get that technology before we do. And there is a race among the countries to try and understand what that technology is, because whoever has it has a huge advantage over the rest of the planet. So we have to be very careful that we don't reveal anything to our adversaries. And so, yes, we have to have secrecy, but we don't have to have secrecy about the bigger issue, which is that these things are real, and even more so now, which has just happened, like literally a week ago. I helped break the story of the fact that there are crashed objects in the possession of programs within the government. Some of them have been contracted out to aerospace companies, but that we actually possess physical evidence that could prove the reality that we're not alone. I happen to believe this is true because I've talked to enough people that have that knowledge. Many of them off the record, names I can't mention, but we did bring forward in our article one person named David Grush who knows this, and he was willing to come forward. And we're hoping that others will follow and will come forward as well. But this is sort of the next level that we're going to now. The first level was for the government to get involved and to realize there's something to this and to take it seriously. And the thing is, for everybody to know, is that the members of Congress who have been briefed, they've been briefed on classified information. They know way more than we do, as do the other people, many people that I've talked to, and the people that are really driving this issue know more than any of us do because it's classified. And so we have to remember that when we're thinking, well, I don't really think I have enough evidence to believe in this. The people in charge have that evidence. And one of the reasons I do the work I do is hoping that eventually some of that will be declassified and we'll be able to give more and more of it to the public. And, all of us want it to come out. So it's a lot to take on faith that we have crashed objects. I mean, that's a really kind of leap that we only started making a week ago. We'll have to see where it goes. I mean, I'm hoping that we will have more people coming forward, that Congress will do its job, because Congress has the information provided by this whistleblower that they have reams and hundreds of pages of information that he gave them, and it's their job to investigate it and follow up on it and determine what they can and do the investigation into the possibility that he's telling the truth, which I have every reason to believe he is. And so it's really, we all have to hope that they do their job and that others will come forward. And there already is discussion about another hearing happening in Congress, which will focus specifically on this issue of crash retrievals. So that would be a very exciting thing if that happens, but I think it will. And so the journey goes on, and someday, hopefully we will get to the bottom. I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what the phenomenon is. I mean, it's very complicated and it has a lot of strange qualities to it, and whether we'll ever know a lot that we all want to know, I don't know, but we certainly should be able to learn a lot more than we know now. And we have to remember that information already exists. A lot more than we know now exists already. It's just classified. And so that's where we stand. I guess, I don't know if I've talked for 20 minutes, but I think I have. Yeah, so so I'm very happy to have questions and comments or whatever you guys want to do.
Roswell, New Mexico. The event that happened there, I think it was 1947. The government said it was a weather balloon. Was it a cover-up? Do they really know? Can you address that issue?
Yeah, I mean, he's asking about the Roswell incident, which probably a lot of people know about, the crash of something in 1947. And you're right. I mean, they initially, so first they said it was a disc. It was a crashed UFO, and it was in the newspaper. And then, like the next day, they came around and said it was a weather balloon. And then years later, they said it was Project Mogul, which was this Russian project that project they were doing to try to, I think, detect Russian radar or something like that. And they've come up with various stories over the years trying to explain this away, and that the bodies that people saw were crash dummies, which are about 6 feet tall, and all the witnesses described these 3-foot creatures. So I mean, we don't, we certainly can't prove, and I don't know the answer. I'm not in a position to say whether it's what happened there. I mean, nobody really is. You just have to look at the record and all the statements that witnesses have made and how the Air Forces handle it. I mean, clearly there's a cover-up, and it's not just Roswell. There's clearly been a cover-up that's started in the 40s, as you point out. But Roswell specifically, I think people have to just make their own determination by reading as much as they can about it. But chances are it was something from another world. I mean, it seems that way.
Did you have a question, Margot? Yeah.
I read an article in Vice about Gary Nolan, the Stanford professor who's a pathologist. And one of the things that was interesting is our inability to analyze the metal of the crashed object because we don't have the technology for that. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, she asked about Dr. Gary Nolan, who is a Stanford University biologist, and he's been studying the physical materials for years in his lab. And so, she was asking about the technique, do we have the technology, do we have the proper equipment to really do the job on that? Right, that's what you're asking, yeah. And just, it's so funny because literally I was just texting with him right before I started talking. And he's an absolutely phenomenal, I encourage everybody who's interested in this to listen to him on some podcasts. He's absolutely amazing. And yes, he's one person in a lab who has been given materials that people say are from crashes, and he does these really fine studies on them, and he's found some that have some really peculiar qualities. He can't prove they're not from here, but the difference, so he's made a contribution, but he's not in one of the programs that possesses these, what people say, or what Grush has said, are intact craft, are large things, that show that are technology. He's been given like little bits to look at them, micro, the very, very tiny structure of them, which is really valuable, but it's not the same as having a whole craft. And assumedly these programs have had these things for a while, like decades even. So they've been able to bring in a lot of experts from different fields. The problem they've had is the secrecy, and one of the problems is they can't bring in enough people because they have to all be so sworn to secrecy, is my understanding. So I think it's different what Gary does from what these programs are able to do. And I think the difference is too that Grush has said that they have absolutely been able to determine definitively that these are non-human. And they have various methods that they've used, which again are classified, to make that determination, whereas Gary hasn't really been able to definitively determine that. He just can determine that there's something weird happening, So it's different. Saying something's anomalous is different from saying that it's non-human, and that we know that for a fact and that it's definitive. So that's what's so radical about what's happening now. So the question is, do any of the people I talk to in government or, behind the scenes make an educated guess or talk about where they might be coming from? People speculate, but it's not so much it's no longer kind of where they're coming from, because the phenomenon is now thought of as being way more complicated than that. It may be like something from another dimension, for instance. It could be time travelers. They call it now non-human intelligence instead of, that's sort of the current term. That it's definitely intelligent, but it's so hard to nail it down as being maybe this or maybe that. There's a lot of different theories about it. So I can't say that, anybody feels clear. Even some people have proposed that it could be ultra-terrestrial, meaning that whoever they are live on the Earth. Or maybe they live under the Earth somewhere, and they're seen coming in and out of the oceans. Yeah. So, they could be like, and some people also, I think it's very conceivable that there are beings on our planet that are not human, but they look human. That's another possibility, that it's possible they've been here longer than we have. There's so many. So it's such a great question, and it's so wonderful to think and speculate about, but nothing has been nailed down. That's sort of what I was hinting at when I said I don't know if we'll ever know really what it is. But I know that the people with the classified information certainly know a lot more about that question too than we do.
How is their budget? I mean, are we ever going, are they really investigating, trying to see if it's extraterrestrial or under the earth? I mean, do they have a budget?
Do they have a budget? Well, the group Arrow that I mentioned has a budget, but they're not really doing the right kind of work. So it's a good question. I mean, there's a lot that Congress can do without having an additional budget. They just need to do investigations. But within the agencies, there are units within all the different agencies that do their own investigations. So, you know, they have their budgets. The whistleblower who just came out worked within the NRO and the NGA, two leading agencies, and he was responsible for a lot of the studies of UAP. So there are groups within all these agencies that are working on it. So they know a lot.
Articles about this one guy in Vegas who saw this green light, and then in the backyard it crashed, and he's calling 911 because he saw 10-foot tall aliens.
Yeah.
Familiar with that?
A little bit familiar.
And then there's another one where they found a craft that on the outside looks 30 feet, but on the inside looks like a football stadium. Can you also tell us how to spot these aliens?
How to what?
How to spot the aliens.
Oh my God, I wish I knew, because then I would be out there spotting them all the time. I don't know how to spot the aliens. I've never seen one. But the Vegas story, I mean, that was happening right at the time that we were putting out our whistleblower story. So I really wasn't able to spend any time with it. I think there's questions about whether it was a hoax, as far as I understand it. But I haven't been following it very closely.
Was it a hoax?
I don't know. I mean, you guys probably know more than I do, because I've been so busy with this other stuff, I haven't paid much attention to it. But I have people telling me that they think it might be a hoax. I don't think it's resolved yet, really. That's all. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm sort of wondering, with all of the research that you've done and all the people that you've talked to, if you have any developed theories of your own about this.
I was hoping I would not be asked what my own theories are about this. It always comes up sooner or later.
What she said.
Yeah, she asked me after all the work research I've done, a very reasonable question, whether I have any theories of my own about it. You know, and I really, and I'm being very honest with you, the more I learn about that, the less I'm able to have a theory about it. You know, I mean, I learn more about the phenomenon and how it behaves and the technology and what people have observed. And, you know, people tell me there are crashed objects. I believe that. But in terms of what they are and where they're from and how they do what they do, I mean, I don't have a theory. There are physicists, though. Like the gentleman mentioned about, it's smaller on the outside but bigger on the inside. There are physicists who can explain how these things work in terms of general relativity. It's not like, I mean, I'm getting a little off track here, but so many people like to say they defy the laws of physics. But they really don't if you know general relativity. So they can be explained on that level. But in terms of my theory, I mean, I just don't know. I do think that whatever is behind this has been around for a very long time. And that I do believe they could have been here before we were, even. I know they're extremely advanced. My understanding is they're not always benevolent, but they're not malevolent either. But, you know, this is just from people who tell me things and they don't necessarily know. So I wish I had it's just nothing you can put your finger on, you know. It's this mystery and we need to figure it out. So I have to say, I really don't have any one theory that works for me. I know that's not very satisfying, but yeah, it's true. Yeah. She asked a really good question, yeah. Like, how do they know they're non-human? Is that from the evaluation of the chemical composition of the craft would be one way. And that, I mean, there is one line that David Grush wrote in our story, I don't know if anyone has it in front of them, but which he sort of referenced some of the scientific techniques they used. But the bottom line is all of that is, again, it's classified. They have not revealed how they know this. He did make a couple of comments about it, but wouldn't everyone like to know? Wouldn't the scientific community like to know? Wouldn't they like to be able to reproduce the studies that have been done? I mean, it's a really good question. And it's just because they don't want anybody to know how they're going about studying these things. And so we don't have the answer to that. I hope we do someday, though.
Where do alien abductions fit into the canon?
Such a good question, too. Alien abductions, where does that fit in? It's really, I have talked to so many people who have talked about having those kinds of experiences, which we call abductions. Some of them now like to use the word experiencer instead of abduction, but I don't know what to make of it. It's not something that I have really focused on in my work because I'm on a different pathway of trying to, get Congress to pay attention, and that's not the way to get Congress to pay attention, is to talk about that. So I don't publicly really deal with it, which means my time looking into it is limited. But I have talked, and I knew Bud Hopkins very well, who was a leading investigator of the whole abduction phenomenon, and I spent a lot of time with him in the later years of his life, and met a lot of people. And I really respect those people. They are talking about things that they actually believed really happened to them, and a lot of them have physical marks, and they've been missing, and nobody knows where they were. I mean, there's never any really hard evidence that a journalist like me could bring forward. That's the thing. It's more people reporting what has happened to them, and they've had all kinds of impacts on people. I mean, I don't doubt that something is going on there with these abductions, and I don't know what else to say, except that I can't report on it. If there was ever a case that was definitive and it was filmed or, but again, people set up cameras in their bedrooms, and every time the thing happens, the camera gets turned off. But there have been people who have tried over the years to document this, and the phenomenon does not allow that to happen, is what it seems like. Yeah, I recommend people who want to know more about that. Whitley Strieber, who wrote the book Communion, which was a huge bestseller, just came out with a new book called Them, which is really, really interesting about some of those cases and other really interesting cases. I highly recommend that book. Yeah. So the question is there a concern for public health? Because we just came through this pandemic, and are there public health officials looking at the objects? Well, the objects, I think, they have been in the possession of these agencies for a long enough time that I'm sure they've taken care of any possible danger, to the people who collected them, that kind of thing. It's an interesting question. You would think maybe something coming from somewhere else would be carrying pathogens that could wipe out our whole species. We don't know, but we have to assume that they took precautions and that they've dealt with that. And so, we just have to assume that. I think what's interesting is that there are medical effects on people, though, related to their encounters with these objects. So there are there are detrimental effects that can happen to people, but I've never heard of any kind of pathogen type thing, being passed around. But it's something, obviously, they've got to think about. Yeah. Just like when they go to the moon, right? They gotta protect the people from any foreign kind of microscopic stuff that might be around. Yeah.
Last week they divulged that the precautions taken and they came back and were inadequate, and the government knew it, but they went ahead anyway.
That's
really my
really
concern.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyone in this room. We don't have to worry about that. They're not going to come land in the middle of us and make us get sick or something. Just if you see one, don't get too close to it. That's all.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a really, really interesting point, actually, that, and there could be a lot of truth to that the more threatened we feel. Yeah, the question, he made the point that maybe because we're in a time where there's a nuclear threat, kind of as a parallel to the Cold War, which is when we were so focused on UFOs in the 50s and 60s during the Cold War. The culture was very focused on them. And we were threatened at that point, due to the threat of nuclear war. And now we're sort of facing that again, so he's proposing that may be what's behind all of this, and everybody's sort of trying to make UFOs be their savior in some way. Or they're just looking for something to deal with this existential threat that we all feel, right? And and I think it's a really interesting point. that could be a factor for a lot of people's interest in this, in the culture. I think that's very valid. I don't think it means that therefore there's nothing to it beyond that. I mean, I don't think there's any possible way of explaining it away as everybody who knows the classified information and everybody in Congress and all these people that have spoken publicly about it are delusional in some way because they're worried about nuclear annihilation. I mean, but I think that could be a factor in terms of why the people are fascinated by it. So I think that's a really interesting comment. Thank you for that. Yeah, so my friend Will over here was asking about streaming. Where can we go to watch the best streaming on this topic? There's a lot of it. I mean, one thing, I'll promote my own work here, since you brought it up. I was part of a series that came out on, it was made for CNN. It's a 5-part series on UFOs. And it gives you the really good overview and the background of the topic. I don't know if you've seen it. But, and it takes you right through 2017 and with the behind-the-scenes story of what happened when the Times came out. And it just came out in 2023, and it's streaming on Hulu. And I was one of the producers on it, and I'm also on one of the people on screen in it. It's called UFOs Investigating the Unknown. And it's on Hulu for those of you that have it. It was made for CNN, like I said, but then it didn't end up going on CNN. So, and I think and the movie The Phenomenon, which was mentioned, is also really good. Another movie called Aerial Phenomenon about the incident in Africa with these children who saw a landed craft is a really fantastic thing to watch. That's streaming. And then there are podcasts all the time with just great people, such as Gary Nolan, who was mentioned, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon. I go on podcasts. I think you just have to search YouTube for the people that you're interested in hearing from. And you'll just find stuff. It's a great way to learn what's going on and to keep up with things.
Is the Skinwalker Ranch one of those?
Yeah, the Skinwalker Ranch has a series on History Channel, which I haven't been watching, but it's not because I don't want to watch it. And there's a book, too, about the Skinwalker Ranch, which is fascinating, the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. But yeah, so if people are interested in sort of the weirder paranormal stuff, like what goes on at Skinwalker, you'll find a lot of stuff on that, too. It's just hard for me to say how to pinpoint it, because I get links and stuff sent to me all the time by people. And so I think if you go on Twitter and follow certain people, there's so many links that are posted to good podcast interviews and good things that are streaming. You just have to kind of get plugged in, and then you'll figure it out. Yeah. Interesting question. So this lady is asking about aviation safety issues with UFOs. She wanted to know an example of an incident that might involve that, and she's also asking about whether that Malaysian airplane that disappeared could have been caused by a UFO. Just to the latter question, I have no idea. I sort of doubt it because there's no reports of it. But who knows? It was out in the middle of nowhere, and maybe there was a UFO and nobody knows it was there. I sort of doubt it, though, just my intuition. But the aviation safety issue, it's not like anybody should be scared about flying because it doesn't happen very often. But in this report, which I wrote about in my second article in 2002, I think it was, there were a lot of cases documented of just UFOs that will come close to an airplane and like fly loops around it. There'll be a UFO that will be heading right for the air. I mean, there's one case of the pilot's name was Phil Schultz. He was flying a TWA craft. I remember this so well. And this object, this disc-shaped object, was just heading right for the front of his plane. And he literally he ducked into a crash position. He just thought the thing was going to hit him, and he didn't have time to do anything about it. And then the thing swerved off. But that's a danger. And sometimes there's a danger of distraction among the crew if there's a UFO outside and everyone's looking at it. And there have been cases where a plane has been pulled off course because of the magnetic or some kind of force that's coming out of a nearby UFO that actually affects its trajectory. So those cases, though, the ones I'm familiar with are really years ago. I've heard of a lot of cases of commercial pilots who see these things but not so much where there's a danger. But it's just really, it's about when the thing comes too close to the plane, and there might be a collision, and you know, there's not a whole lot of time for the pilot to react. That's a problem. And in some cases, the pilots do react. There are some cases where they made abrupt movements to avoid a collision, and then people on the plane were injured because of that. But this doesn't happen very often, so don't worry about it.
What other countries are investigating this?
Although she's asking what other countries are investigating this. That's a really interesting question because after my book came out in 2010, I became very interested in looking at what other countries were doing because they were doing a lot more than we were, and because they were open about it with their populations, right? So I was especially interested in France and Chile because they had government agencies that were openly studying this. And they would take reports from the public and they would look into them, and they would have the police involved and the weather experts and the psychologists. They would use all the people from various disciplines within the country who would contribute to their investigations, and it was just the way it should naturally be done, and they weren't ridiculing it. So yes, I mean, a lot of other countries are involved. Some of them are more secretive than others. But those countries, when I studied them, those two in particular, I felt were models of how we should be doing it, of how everyone should do it. So I went to those countries and spoke to got to know the people involved, and I'd actually came back and tried to bring back information to people I was connected to in government to sort of say, look, this is how it can be done. So yes, other countries were way less secretive than we were, and a lot of them are in South America and in Europe too. UK was very involved as well. So, and then China and Russia, of course, are as well, but they're more secretive about it, just like we are. Yeah, I think this gentleman has a question. Yeah. Yeah, he's asking, you know, was Arrow set up this agency outside of, I guess, outside of the legal restrictions that should be applied to it? When you talk about Title 50, I don't know exactly what way you mean that.
They don't have the authority to request Title 50 information from others.
Yeah, to request like from special access programs and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think Arrow has the authority. And again, I probably don't know that much about it, actually. You might know as much as I do, but yes, I mean, the gentleman who heads it up, Sean Kirkpatrick, I don't know if he has the clearances, I don't think he does, to get access to certain levels of information that are buried in these special access programs. The kinds of information that the whistleblowers are taking to Congress, they are choosing to go to Congress also because they don't really trust Arrow. So yeah, I mean, you want to give him plausible deniability, you want to keep him focused in a certain direction, which for those of you who watched the hearing with the head of Arrow, I don't know if you did, but it was very clear that the path that he's on is to just look at reports and try to explain them all away. He basically believes that he can explain them all, and he's not looking into the deeper level of this, which is more what you're talking about. So I don't know how deliberate it was, but it probably was on some level. Yeah, so Arrow has been problematic for a lot of reasons. Yeah.
Right over here to go in the direction.
Yeah.
Have you heard any more about San Marino bringing it back to the United Nations as a topic?
Yeah, I mean, the San Marino, I was asking about San Marino, this little tiny, I guess it's a country in Italy. It's just like
Yeah, they were just
tiniest country in the world, maybe. I don't know. It's a little like yeah, they've initiated a effort where the UN is going to take this up. Because I guess the UN has to be approached by a government to do that, and this government is small enough they were able to pull it off. That's my understanding. And I think it's September is when they actually take it to the UN. They have to wait until the scheduling of everything, but my understanding is September is when things will be happening. Yeah, so that'll be another interesting development that everyone will be watching, if the UN, to see what happens with the UN getting involved in this. Yeah, and then we also have NASA that's gotten more involved too. NASA has a panel that's studying this now, and they did an all-day kind of open public panel hearing on this a few weeks ago. So a lot more involvement from many different areas, finally. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as far as I understand it, from what I've been told, by people, is that Russia certainly has this kind of stuff that we have, same kind of thing, but they're not public about it. And the smaller countries, I don't think they have it. I mean, from working with France and Chile, I have no reason to believe that they had something stashed away that they weren't telling anybody about. But it's possible, because if it's secret, we don't know it's there. But nobody's come out openly and said, we have this stuff. No government has done that and said, we have it. So the ones that do have it are not disclosing that. And that's what we hope is going to happen eventually, that it will be disclosed. That they, maybe another country will do it before we will.
And a question.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing.
Sure.
There's someone here, Sarah Letterman. This lady, Leslie, wouldn't be here unless it was for Sarah making the connection. So thank you, Sarah. Are you back there?
I think she had to leave early.
Oh, she had to leave.
Yeah, she was here though. She was here. I'll thank her for it. Yeah.
I had a question about the strongest evidence in terms of talking to someone. Can you relate a story about someone who just bowled you over and made you really a believer?
So she's asking about stories that bowled me over and made me a believer, like where there is one. I mean, it's really the accumulation, I mean, the first thing I did was I read that French report that I mentioned in 1999, which bowled me over, because it was written by generals and admirals. And then I read other reports, and then I talked to more and more people. So it's not like one thing was ever a real turning point for me. It's really about the accumulation of data and cases that's what convinces, I think, anybody. Because it's not simple, and yeah, you might, if you just read about a few cases, you might think, okay, well, maybe that could be explained this way or that way. But when you spend years and years, reading about so many of them and seeing how they interconnect and talking to the people who have actually witnessed these things, I don't know, it just becomes a accumulation. And then in my book, I tried to put some of the cases that I thought were the most evidential. They were all military cases or aviation cases. But I can't say there was one, you know what I mean? Yeah, but anyway, yeah.
Another one here.
How old is the first reported sighting or report?
How old do they go? How far do the sightings go back?
Yeah.
Yeah, like really far. Like as far as there's been people writing these things down. Like in the certainly there's case reports from the 1800s. There's a really interesting book by Jacques Vallée and one other person that deals with all these old cases. I forget the name of the book. But then a lot of people are fascinated by artwork that goes back centuries, in which there are paintings of what look like UFOs. We don't know for sure, but they look like it. So, yeah. But there are really early case reports, and they're fascinating to read. And some of them involve actual creatures or beings that people reported seeing a long time ago. Yeah.
Go ahead, just go over here, Rick.
Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned whistleblowers a couple of times. The whistleblowers are revealing what?
Okay. Well, there's one whistleblower who's come forward, and by definition, a whistleblower is somebody who is accusing the United States government of doing something illegal. So if somebody just comes forward and says, well, I know something about a crashed object in a program, but I just want you to know my information, they're not a whistleblower per se. I mean, a whistleblower is somebody who's saying, I know there's a crashed object and it's illegal that it's being withheld from oversight. And that's what this whistleblower who I just wrote about a week ago, named Dave Grush, has done. He's saying, I have the data to show that we do have this object, object or objects in these programs, and it's illegal because the law requires that there should be oversight over such activities. I mean, these programs have hidden themselves away to escape oversight, and they're black projects, and he's saying to the U.S. government, this is illegal activity that you need to deal with. So that's what makes him a whistleblower. And there are others. I mean, and I don't know some of them are people that may not be accusing the government of anything illegal, but they have the same kinds of information that he does about the program. And there are others who have already spoken to Congress. They just have not made their names public. And there are others who have spoken to Arrow as well. So yeah, I mean, so we'll see when they start coming forward which ones are actually accusing the U.S. government of illegal activity and which ones are just wanting to share information. But I think there will be more whistleblowers who actually realize that these programs are illegal and that they're supposed to have oversight that they're not getting. So yeah.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so Jackie Garrity, my friend over there, is asking about the secrecy and why is there such a need to have so much secrecy. He's wondering if it's because they're afraid of panic. I mean, I think back in the 60s and 50s and 40s when this thing first surfaced, there was a concern about panic and they were in the middle of a Cold War. And nowadays, I think the major concern is more around revealing any secrets we have about the technology. We're so protective of what we've learned about these objects, and we're so concerned that our adversaries not know even how we go about studying them. We don't even want them to know what sensors we use to document these events. They certainly don't want them to know have we been able to reproduce that technology? Do we understand it? Are we using it in our own arsenal? I mean, these are the things that, so I think a lot of it is the military being concerned about national security, protecting our national security by not revealing these secrets. But I mean, there are other people who say, yeah, that there could be panic and, we don't know how the society would react. That's a concern also, and it's so complicated. I'm sure I don't have all the answers about why the people in charge are being secretive because I don't know how their minds work, but I know that the technology is a big concern within the military and the national security issues.
These alien abductions.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, everybody could hear him, right, talking about the Betty and Barney Hill case. And you're right, it is one of the most profound things to hear those tapes. I've heard them myself, and they're transcribed. I think the book is called An Interrupted Journey by John Fuller, I believe. And the psychiatrist that this couple had was very, very well known. He was not a UFO guy at all. And he separately did these regressions with them, and it was really incredible what they went through to have to express, because most people, I mean, it's not just them too. I mean, this happens to so many people. It all gets repressed and they're they're not conscious of it. And the only way they can, and a lot of them don't. And the only way they can access the memories is through some kind of altered state, through some kind of hypnotic regression. And you have to be very careful that you're not with a therapist who's asking you leading questions and all of that. But yeah, it is. I mean, the whole realm of the abduction area and the close encounter phenomenon of people who have had really close encounters with these objects and with what they say are beings is really fascinating. For anyone that's curious about it, it's just all fascinating. My focus is more on let's get the government to do its job, but this stuff, that other level of it is really, really interesting. So I thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, An Interrupted Journey is the book.
I'd like to meet these individuals.
Yeah, well, you mean the aliens? I don't know if you'd want to meet them. I wouldn't. But anyway, so that's, if anybody wants to kind of get a taste of a really credible account, the book is An Interrupted Journey. It's really, really good book. There's another question by Scott, who knows a lot.
Are there any recent developments you're aware of that haven't yet made it into an article in the past few days?
Are there recent developments that haven't made it into an article? I mean, yeah, there always are, because I talk to people off the record all the time.
Anything you're prepared to share?
I can't. I mean, it's really just about other people. I mean, I can share there are other people that have the same thing to say that Dave does. And I mean, they have their own ways of coming to that conclusion. And they might have had even more direct contact with the physical material than he has had. So it's really about a lot of people saying the same thing, but they're not willing to go on the record, so I can't put them in a story, Yeah, so, you know, it's hard because I feel like most people don't want to believe it, and I have a certain amount of knowledge that is really substantial, but I can't talk about. And the same with the members of Congress. They have way more knowledge than I do, and they can't talk about it, what they know, which is way more specific than what I know. So it's so frustrating because we all want to know. And I'm trying to help bring it out as best as I can.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The crashings, all these crashes, have the crashes increased? And is it a certain particular kind of terrain that they crash in? And if they're so elite and tough intellectually, why do they keep crashing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question people ask a lot. If they're so elite, they're so advanced, why do they crash? And then you're asking for details like, are there certain types of places that they crash in? Yeah, I mean, most of the locations where the crashes have occurred, again, are classified.
Yeah.
I doubt that there's any one particular terrain, though, because probably every time it happens is for a different reason. And the question about why they crash, I mean, I've heard people, you know, address the fact that really, there probably haven't been that many, considering the numbers of sightings that there have been since the 40s, considering how often people see these things. Even if there is a few dozen of them over 90 years or something, or 80 years, it's not that many. All kinds of different reasons could cause it. I mean, if you imagine if we went onto the atmosphere of another planet somewhere far away, maybe we would crash. We don't know what's going to be there. Maybe they can't, you know, there may be issues with the radar that we're using or something. Or yeah, a storm. I mean, you know, who knows? And also people have said that some of these might be landings rather than crashes. Some of the material that's been collected may be landings. Some people have even speculated maybe even gifts to us. I don't know if anybody's read the book by Diana Pasulka called American Cosmic, but she talks about that possibility that maybe things are left or given to us for whatever reason. So the word crashes is kind of a simplistic way of describing it. There could be all kinds of ways that we acquire these things. And all the questions, your questions were great, but we don't have the answers because they're classified. I just keep saying that over and over again.
Thank you, Leslie. It's been incredible, really. We're so pleased that you have this connection to the South Coast, that you would be able to come. And I think Leslie will probably be around for a few more minutes if you have additional questions. I want to remind everyone that we do come back in September 12th, and the general topic will be climate change, and more coming along when we know exactly. So put it on your calendars. See you in September.
Thank you very much.
That's great.